Have you ever had one quiet moment reveal everything about the people sitting across from you? Imagine celebrating Christmas with the family your daughter is about to marry into, expecting laughter, warm food, and holiday memories, only to have a sealed envelope slid across the dinner table with your name on it. No warning. No explanation. Just a smile from the groom and one sentence that changes the entire night. What happened next wasn't just about money, a prenuptial agreement, or a wealthy family. It became a test of character, respect, and a lesson so powerful that no one in that room would ever forget it. And before this story is over, one man will discover that the old coat hanging by the front door says far more about him than it ever did about the man wearing it. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far this community reaches. And if stories about family, integrity, and life-changing moments are your kind of content, make sure you subscribe to Royal Rich Chronicles so you never miss another unforgettable story. The room fell completely silent. Only seconds earlier, soft Christmas music had floated through the house while laughter drifted around the dinner table. The smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and fresh pine filled the air, and the fire crackling in the stone fireplace made the evening feel like something out of a holiday movie. Then everything changed. Ethan's father reached inside his navy blazer without saying a word. His movements were calm, almost practiced, as he pulled out a thick white envelope and slowly slid it across the polished oak table. It glided to a stop only a few inches from my dinner plate. No one touched their food. No one spoke. My daughter, Emily, looked from the envelope to my face, her smile fading as confusion settled into her eyes. Across the table, Ethan leaned back in his chair with his arms folded, wearing the confident expression of someone who believed the conversation had already been decided before it even began. His mother quietly lowered her wine glass and watched me with polite curiosity. The only sound left in the room was the ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I lowered my eyes to the envelope. There wasn't a name written on it. Not mine. Not Emily's. Only one neatly printed word stretched across the front. Family. I picked it up slowly. For some reason, it felt heavier than ordinary paper should. I think you'll understand why this is necessary, Ethan said calmly. His voice carried confidence, but underneath it was something else. Expectation. He expected me to agree. I didn't answer. Instead, I carefully opened the envelope while every pair of eyes stayed fixed on my hands. Inside was a neatly organized stack of legal papers. Before I could read the first page, Ethan's father quietly spoke. Please read the entire document. His tone was respectful, but there was something unusual in the way he watched me, almost as though he wasn't interested in my answer. He was interested in my reaction. I gave nod. During 38 years in the United States Army, I'd opened classified mission briefings before sunrise, letters notifying families that someone they loved wasn't coming home, promotion orders, retirement documents, and enough official paperwork to fill a warehouse. Compared to those moments, opening an envelope at Christmas dinner should have been easy. Yet somehow, this felt heavier. I turned the first page. For nearly 2 full minutes, no one in the room made a sound. Not even the silverware moved. My name is Richard Walker. I'm 72 years old, and if you pass me at the grocery store, chances are you'd never look twice. Most people assume I'm another retired old man stretching every dollar of Social Security until the next check arrives. I can't blame them. My pickup truck is older than some college graduates. The brown winter coat I wear has a replacement zipper and patches hidden inside the sleeves. My work boots have been repaired so many times I've honestly lost count. Every Tuesday morning I drink coffee at the same little diner. I mow my own lawn. I fix things instead of replacing them. I've never been interested in impressing strangers. And the funny thing is, none of those assumptions have ever bothered me. Because they aren't true. Very few people know that I retired from the United States Army as a 4-star general after nearly 4 decades of service. My military pension alone pays more each month than many people earn in a year. The home where I've lived for decades has been paid off for a long time. The investment portfolio my late wife Margaret and I built together quietly grew year after year while everyone else chased bigger houses and newer cars. Financial security was never something I lacked. It simply wasn't something I felt the need to advertise. Especially after losing Margaret. Money became even less important the day cancer took her away. She had a habit of wrapping Christmas presents while giving lessons that sounded simple at the time but grew wiser with every passing year. One December evening, she looked up from a pile of wrapping paper, smiled, and said, "Richard, if you really want to know who someone is, let them believe you have nothing." I laughed and asked if she was testing me. She smiled without looking up. "No," she said softly. "I'm preparing you." At the time, I thought she was simply sharing another one of life's little observations. Years later, I realized she had been handing me one of the greatest lessons I'd ever receive. That lesson was sitting across the dinner table with me on Christmas Day. A week before Christmas, Emily called. "Dad." I could hear excitement in her voice before she even finished the first sentence. "Ethan wants both families together this year. It would really mean a lot if you came." I smiled. I thought he spent every Christmas skiing. He changed his plans. For me? For us. There was warmth in her voice that made it impossible to say no. She sounded happy. Really happy. And after losing Margaret, hearing my daughter laugh had become one of my favorite sounds in the world. "Of course I'll come," I told her. I wouldn't miss it. She thanked me 3 different times before hanging up. But after the call ended, I remained standing in my quiet kitchen, staring out the window. Because while Emily was excited, something about Ethan had been bothering me for months. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just little moments. Tiny cracks that most people ignored. He'd begun judging restaurants by whether they offered valet parking. He complimented expensive watches more often than kind people. He spoke warmly to wealthy business clients but impatiently to waiters carrying heavy trays. Whenever he visited my home, his eyes wandered around the living room with polite disappointment, lingering just a little too long on the old furniture Margaret and I had shared for decades. He never insulted me directly. That would have been easier. Instead, he mastered the kind of arrogance that hides behind perfect manners. The kind that smiles while quietly deciding someone isn't worth very much. Emily either didn't see it, or love made her hope she was imagining it. I prayed she was right. But deep inside, Margaret's words kept echoing in my mind. Let them believe you have nothing. Looking back now, I realize Christmas dinner was never really about the envelope. That envelope was only the spark. The fire had been quietly building for a long time. And before the night was over, every person sitting around that beautiful holiday table would be forced to discover what they truly valued. None of us knew it yet. But Christmas was about to stop feeling like a celebration and start feeling like a courtroom. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. Sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor while fresh coffee filled the house with a familiar aroma. Outside, frost clung to the old maple tree Margaret had planted more than 30 years earlier. I stood quietly by the window for a moment, coffee mug warming my hands, looking at the peaceful neighborhood we'd called home for decades. Christmas had always been Margaret's favorite holiday. Even after 6 years, I still expected to hear her humming Christmas songs somewhere in the house. Grief has a strange way of doing that. It doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it simply becomes quieter. As I finished my coffee, I walked into the bedroom and opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were pieces of an entire lifetime. Old family photographs. Handwritten Christmas cards. Military letters tied together with faded ribbon. And resting neatly on top, my old brown winter coat. I smiled the moment I saw it. Margaret used to joke that if I ever bought a new coat, she'd never recognize me again. She loved teasing me about it. I picked it up carefully, running my hand over the worn sleeve where she'd sewn a small repair years ago. The stitching wasn't perfect. That was exactly why I loved it. It reminded me that love rarely looked perfect. It simply stayed. "Well, Maggie," I whispered into the quiet room with a smile, "I guess we're about to find out what kind of family our little girl is marrying into." The empty room offered no reply. But somehow, it still felt like she'd heard me. I slipped on the old coat, grabbed my truck keys, and headed outside. The engine of my 20-year-old Ford protested for a second before rumbling to life. "Come on, old friend," I chuckled. "You've still got one more Christmas in you." The truck answered with another growl. "Good enough." The drive across Charlotte took a little over half an hour. As the neighborhoods changed, so did the scenery. Small brick homes slowly gave way to larger estates decorated with elaborate Christmas lights. Perfect hedges, stone driveways, luxury SUVs gleaming beneath oversized wreaths. Every street looked like it belonged inside a holiday magazine. I wasn't impressed. I'd spent enough years traveling the world to know that expensive neighborhoods and happy families weren't always the same thing. Money could buy beautiful houses. It couldn't guarantee peaceful homes. Eventually I turned into a quiet cul-de-sac lined with elegant brick houses. Ethan's parents lived at the very end. The home was beautiful. Large without being flashy. Tastefully decorated with white lights wrapped around every tree, fresh garlands framing the front entrance, and a massive Christmas wreath hanging from the front door. Whoever decorated it understood restraint. I appreciated that. I parked my old pickup beside a row of polished luxury vehicles. The difference between them couldn't have been more obvious. My truck looked like it had just wandered into the wrong neighborhood. I smiled to myself. Machines don't measure people. People do. Before I even reached the front porch, the front door flew open. "Dad!" Emily hurried down the steps and wrapped both arms around me. She still gave hugs exactly the way she had when she was 10 years old. Tight enough to make you forget everything else. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I'm so glad you came. I wouldn't be anywhere else." She stepped back and smiled. For a moment I simply looked at her. She looked happy. Brighter than she'd been in months. Seeing that eased something inside me. Then Ethan appeared in the doorway. He smiled confidently as always and extended his hand. "Merry Christmas, Richard." He always called me Richard. Never Dad. Never Mr. Walker. Just Richard. I never corrected him. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something people eventually choose. I shook his hand warmly. "Merry Christmas." His eyes drifted down toward my coat. Only for a second. But I noticed. "You know," he said with a laugh, "it's freezing outside." "It certainly is. You should let Emily buy you a new winter coat." Emily looked embarrassed almost instantly. "Dad likes that coat." Ethan laughed. "I'm just saying, everyone deserves an upgrade eventually." I smiled. "So I've heard." He laughed, thinking I'd agreed with him. In reality, I'd simply answered his statement. Inside, warmth surrounded us immediately. The scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon, fresh pine, and baked bread drifted through the house. Holiday music played softly somewhere in the background while children laughed upstairs. Family photographs lined the walls. Vacations. Birthdays. Graduations. Wedding anniversaries. It felt welcoming. Comfortable. Like a home filled with memories. Ethan's mother greeted me with a warm smile. "Richard, we're so happy you could join us. Thank you for inviting me." She hugged Emily before disappearing toward the kitchen. Moments later Ethan's father approached. He offered a firm handshake. Unlike his son, he looked directly into my eyes. Not once did his gaze wander toward my old coat or the truck outside. That small detail stayed with me. Military life teaches you to notice tiny things. Sometimes the smallest observations reveal the biggest truths. "Glad you made it," he said sincerely. "So am I." There was something steady about him. Quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need attention. I liked him immediately. Dinner was served shortly afterward. The dining room looked beautiful. Crystal glasses reflected the glow of candlelight. Fine china rested neatly beside polished silverware. A fresh centerpiece of pine branches and red berries stretched across the middle of the long oak table. Everyone settled into their seats while conversation flowed naturally. At first, everything felt perfectly normal. People talked about holiday travel, favorite Christmas traditions, football games, vacation homes, ski trips, wine collections, stock market forecasts, luxury cruises planned for spring. I mostly listened. After spending nearly 4 decades commanding soldiers, I'd learned something valuable. The person speaking the least often learns the most. Across the table, Ethan animatedly described a business conference he'd attended in New York. "The networking was incredible," he said. "I probably made more valuable connections in 3 days than most people make in 5 years." Several people nodded approvingly. Then another story followed. A coworker nearing retirement had apparently complained about financial worries. Ethan chuckled before taking another sip of wine. "I finally told him something nobody else would." He grinned. "If you're still broke at 65, you've probably made bad decisions your whole life." A few people laughed. Someone quietly agreed. Then, his eyes drifted toward me. Almost casually. "I mean," he continued with a shrug, "retirement should be comfortable if people plan ahead." The room grew just a little quieter. I calmly carved another slice of turkey onto my plate before looking up. "Planning certainly matters." "It does," he agreed quickly. His mother smiled sympathetically. "It must be difficult living on a fixed income these days." Emily shifted uncomfortably beside him. Before I could answer, Ethan answered for me. "Richard manages." Manages. Interesting word. Not survives. Not enjoys. Not thrives. Just manages. I smiled politely. "I've been fortunate." He mistook the answer for agreement. But inside, Margaret's voice echoed once again. "If you ever want to know someone's character, let them believe you have nothing." Across the table, Ethan continued discussing investment strategies as though the conversation had never changed. I noticed something else. Every time someone mentioned wealth, he sat a little straighter. Every time someone mentioned kindness, he barely reacted. That wasn't cruelty. It was something more dangerous. It was misplaced admiration. He genuinely believed success and worth were the same thing. The tragedy was, he wasn't born believing that. Somewhere along the way, he'd learned it. And unless life corrected him, he'd spend years measuring people with the wrong ruler. I looked toward Emily. She laughed politely whenever everyone else laughed. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She'd noticed the tension. She simply didn't know how to stop it. I quietly reached beneath the table and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. She looked over. I smiled. Just enough to tell her everything was all right. She smiled back. But only for a moment. Because none of us knew that before dessert was served, one envelope would expose every assumption sitting around that Christmas table. And once it appeared, there would be no pretending anymore. Dessert arrived with the comforting smell of pumpkin pie, pecan pie, and fresh coffee. For a few minutes, the tension seemed to melt away. Plates were passed around, someone laughed at a football game playing quietly in the next room, and Christmas almost felt normal again. Almost. Then Ethan's father slowly stood from his chair. He didn't rush. He didn't announce what he was doing. He simply walked toward a polished sideboard against the wall, opened the top drawer, and removed a thick white envelope. For reasons I couldn't explain, every instinct I developed during 38 years in the army suddenly became alert. Something important was about to happen. He returned to the table without a word. The room gradually fell silent as everyone watched him. Then he gently slid the envelope across the polished oak table. It stopped directly beside my coffee cup. "I think," he said calmly, "we should settle this before the wedding." No one reached for dessert anymore. The Christmas music still played softly in the background, but it suddenly felt a million miles away. Even the crackling fireplace seemed quieter. Emily looked from the envelope too. Her smile faded almost instantly. "What is it?" she asked softly. Ethan answered before his father could. "It's just something practical." Practical. Interesting choice of words. I lowered my eyes toward the envelope. One word was printed neatly across the front. Family. No name. No explanation. Just family. I picked it up slowly. The paper felt strangely heavy in my hands. "I think you'll understand why this is necessary," Ethan added confidently. His voice carried the relaxed certainty of someone who believed there was only one reasonable response. Agreement. I looked at him for a brief second but said nothing. Instead, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested several neatly organized legal documents. Before I reached the first page, Ethan's father quietly spoke. "Please read everything." His voice wasn't demanding. It sounded almost apologetic. I nodded once. "I intend to." The room became completely still. I began reading. Every page turned with a soft whisper. No forks touched plates. No glasses lifted from the table. Even the children playing upstairs seemed unusually quiet. For nearly 2 full minutes, no one spoke. I've opened classified military briefings before dangerous missions. I've opened casualty reports no family should ever have to receive. I've opened retirement papers after dedicating most of my life to serving this country. Yet somehow, opening those pages during Christmas dinner felt heavier than all of them. Finally I reached the title. Premarital Property Agreement. A prenuptial agreement. I continued reading carefully. Every paragraph had been professionally written. Every clause carefully prepared. Every sentence polished by an experienced attorney. From a legal standpoint, it was excellent work. From a father's standpoint, something felt wrong. Very wrong. I reached the final page. Then calmly placed every document back inside the envelope. I folded my hands together. And waited. The silence stretched long enough that Ethan finally smiled. "I'm sure you understand," he said. "It's pretty standard these days." His mother nodded in agreement. "We're simply trying to protect family assets." I looked at her politely. I believe every family has the right to protect what they've worked for. Relief immediately crossed Ethan's face. He thought I'd agreed. His shoulders relaxed. He leaned comfortably back into his chair. Conversation over. Decision made. At least, that's what he believed. Across the table, however, his father hadn't relaxed at all. In fact, he seemed even more focused on me now. His eyes studied my expression as though searching for something everyone else had missed. I noticed. Military training teaches you to recognize observation. He wasn't watching my reaction because he wanted approval. He was watching because he was trying to understand me. There was a difference. Emily stared quietly into her untouched coffee. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the mug, but she never took a sip. She hated conflict. Always had. Even as a little girl. Looking at her now pulled me backward through time. Suddenly I wasn't sitting at an elegant Christmas dinner anymore. I was standing in a church parking lot nearly 30 years earlier. Emily had been 8 years old. Every child in our neighborhood seemed to have shiny new bicycles that Christmas. Bright colors. Fancy gears. Chrome handlebars. She wanted one more than anything. Money wasn't the issue. Margaret and I could have bought the nicest bicycle in town without thinking twice. Instead, Margaret came home with an older bicycle she'd found at a church charity sale. The paint had faded. The basket leaned slightly to one side. There were scratches across the frame. Emily's excitement disappeared the moment she saw it. "But," she whispered, "it's old." Margaret knelt beside her. "I know. Everyone else has new bikes." "I know. Then why can't I?" Margaret gently brushed a strand of hair away from Emily's face. "Because I want you to learn something before life teaches it the hard way." Emily frowned. "I don't understand." "You don't have to today." She smiled warmly. "Just ride it for 1 week." Emily reluctantly agreed. For several days she barely smiled. Then, exactly 1 week later, she burst through the front door laughing. "Dad! What happened?" "My best friend said she likes riding with me because we always have more fun." Margaret looked at me without saying a word. Then she kissed Emily on the forehead. "See?" Emily looked confused. "What?" "The people worth keeping," Margaret said softly, "never cared what your bicycle looked like." That lesson stayed with me. Apparently, it hadn't stayed with everyone. Back at the Christmas table, I glanced once more toward the envelope resting beside my coffee. This wasn't really about legal paperwork. It never had been. It was about assumptions. Someone had already decided who I was. Someone had already decided what my daughter brought into this marriage. And neither assumption had been questioned. I wasn't angry. If anything, I felt strangely calm. Because life has taught me something simple. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe there is nothing to gain. I folded my hands once more. Across the table, Ethan smiled confidently. He believed the evening was moving exactly as planned. He had absolutely no idea. The hardest conversation of Christmas hadn't even begun. And before this night was over, every assumption sitting around that beautifully decorated dinner table was about to collapse. I remained quiet. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because silence has a way of making people reveal more than words ever could. Over nearly 4 decades in uniform, I'd learned that the first person to rush into a conversation usually loses the opportunity to truly understand it. So I simply watched. Ethan shifted comfortably in his chair, convinced everything had gone exactly the way he'd expected. His mother reached for her coffee, clearly relieved that there hadn't been an argument. Emily stared down at the tablecloth, tracing invisible circles with her fingertip. I knew that look. She was blaming herself. And that hurt far more than anything written in the agreement. "My apologies," she said softly, barely above a whisper. "Dad, I didn't know they were going to bring it up tonight." I turned toward her and smiled. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart." "But..." "No." I gently interrupted. "This isn't your burden to carry." She looked at me with grateful but worried eyes. For just a second, I saw the little girl who used to run into my arms after scraping her knees on the sidewalk. She'd always believed every problem in the world could be fixed with a hug. I wished this one were that simple. Across the table, Ethan cleared his throat. "I've seen too many ugly divorces," he said. "People spend decades building something, and then one bad marriage destroys everything." "I've seen difficult endings too," I replied calmly. He nodded, encouraged by my answer. "Exactly. My parents worked incredibly hard for what they have." "I'm sure they did. They deserve to protect it." "They absolutely do." Each answer seemed to reassure him even more. He mistook calmness for agreement. He couldn't see that I wasn't evaluating the document. I was evaluating the people presenting it. There's an important difference. Ethan's father hadn't spoken for several minutes. Instead, he quietly watched the conversation unfold, occasionally glancing from his son to me. His expression never changed. Not once. That interested me. Leaders learn to read rooms. Parents do too. And something told me this father was paying attention to far more than legal paperwork. Trying to ease the tension, Ethan's mother smiled politely. "So, Richard." "Yes?" "Emily told us you're retired." "I am." "What did you do before retirement?" "I served in the army." "Oh." She smiled kindly. "My brother spent several years in the National Guard." "That's honorable service." "It certainly is." She took another sip of coffee. "How long were you in?" 38 years. Her eyebrows lifted. "That's quite a career." "It was." "What rank did you retire as?" Before I could answer, Ethan laughed. "Mom, military guys never like talking about themselves." He looked at me. "Richard's one of the most humble people I've met." Everyone chuckled. Including me. He had no idea he'd just saved me from answering. Across the table, however, his father noticed. I caught the subtle movement of his eyes. He'd seen the interruption. He'd seen my hesitation. And unlike everyone else, he was curious. The conversation drifted toward Christmas gifts. Bright wrapping paper soon covered the dining table as everyone exchanged presents. Laughter slowly returned. At least for a little while. Ethan reached toward a neatly wrapped package with my name on the tag. "This one's from Richard." He lifted it with one hand. "It's lighter than I expected." I smiled. "It is." Emily grinned. "Dad never buys ordinary gifts." She handed the package to Ethan. Carefully, he peeled away the wrapping paper. Inside rested a handcrafted walnut keepsake box. The rich wood caught the glow of the Christmas lights, revealing deep chocolate-colored grain polished until it looked almost silky. Every edge was smooth. Every corner perfectly joined. No visible nails. No screws. Just craftsmanship. Emily gasped. "Dad!" She lifted it gently. "You made this." "I did." Her fingers traced the polished lid before slowly opening it. Inside, carved into the wood with careful precision, was a single sentence. "Family isn't built by money. It's built by showing up." Emily's eyes instantly filled with tears. She covered her mouth. "It's beautiful." Without hesitation she stood and wrapped her arms around me. "I love it." "I hoped you would." When she sat back down, Ethan looked inside the box. "It's nice. Just nice." His mother smiled warmly. "No, Ethan, it's far more than nice." She admired the craftsmanship. "This is incredible." Then Ethan's father quietly reached for it. He didn't immediately look inside. Instead, he turned the box over in his hands, studying every joint, every curve, every polished surface. "You built this yourself." "I enjoy woodworking." He looked closer. "There aren't any visible fasteners. They're hidden." He smiled for the very first time that evening. "My grandfather built furniture exactly like this." For a brief moment, nothing else in the room mattered. Not the envelope. Not the prenuptial agreement. Not assumptions. Just two men appreciating the satisfaction that comes from creating something with your own hands. Respect had entered the conversation. Not because of wealth. Not because of titles. Simply because craftsmanship recognizes craftsmanship. The moment was short-lived. Ethan's parents handed him their gift. He eagerly opened the elegant black box. Inside rested an expensive Swiss watch. Its polished steel reflected the Christmas lights as everyone admired it. "Wow," Ethan whispered. "I've wanted this model for years." His mother laughed. We figured it was time. He immediately fastened it around his wrist. It looks amazing. It certainly does, I said sincerely. Then Ethan looked toward my left wrist. You don't really wear watches, do you? I gently rolled back my sleeve. An old military field watch rested there. The crystal was scratched. The numbers had faded. The leather strap had softened after decades of use. But it still kept perfect time. He chuckled. You should let Emily upgrade that one too. I looked down at the old watch. My fingers rested lightly against its worn leather strap. I don't think I could. Why not? I smiled quietly. It still reminds me of someone. He looked confused. Emily wasn't. She knew exactly who I meant. She reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. No words were needed. Some memories are too valuable to replace, even when newer, shinier versions exist. As dinner ended, everyone moved into the living room. A football game played quietly on the television while coffee cups were refilled. The women carried dishes into the kitchen. The atmosphere relaxed just enough for conversation to begin flowing again. Ethan poured himself another drink and settled into an armchair across from me. So, Richard. Yes? You've got to admit retirement can be stressful. It can. My financial advisor says most retirees underestimate how much money they'll actually need. Sometimes they do. I've been telling Emily we should probably help with more of your expenses. Emily looked horrified. Ethan. What? Dad doesn't. I gently raised a hand before she could continue. It's thoughtful of you. He smiled proudly. I just don't want you struggling. I appreciate your concern. And I meant it. Because beneath the pride, I still believed there was genuine kindness somewhere inside him. The problem wasn't that Ethan wanted to help people. The problem was that he'd convinced himself he always knew who needed help. He'd confused appearances with reality. And that's one of the easiest mistakes success can teach. A few minutes later, I noticed Ethan's father quietly slip through the back door onto the patio. Something told me he wasn't stepping outside simply for fresh air. I waited another minute, then excused myself from the conversation and followed him. Cold December air greeted me the moment I stepped outside. Christmas lights shimmered across the backyard, reflecting softly against the fresh frost covering the grass. For a while, neither of us spoke. He stood with his hands resting on the wooden railing, looking out into the quiet darkness. Finally, without turning around, he broke the silence. You were an officer. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I smiled faintly. I was. I thought so. What gave it away? He looked over his shoulder. The posture. I laughed quietly. I've spent years trying to lose that. It never really disappears. No. It doesn't. He finally turned to face me. What rank? There it was. The question that had almost been answered inside. I studied him for a moment. Then I simply smiled. I retired satisfied. He held my gaze for several long seconds. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. I understand. We stood there quietly, watching the Christmas lights dance across the yard. After a long pause, he spoke again. I don't think you've told my son everything. No. I don't think you've told Emily everything either. No. He slipped both hands into his coat pockets. Sometimes our children only know the version of us we've allowed them to see. They do. He sighed heavily. They're good kids. They are. But? His voice carried unmistakable disappointment. My son's become too impressed with success. I said nothing. He didn't need advice. He needed someone willing to hear the truth. I kept hoping I was imagining it. His eyes drifted toward the glowing windows of the house. But tonight, He slowly shook his head. I wasn't. I followed his gaze. Inside, everyone laughed at something happening on television. From the outside, it looked like the perfect Christmas gathering. But appearances, I'd learned long ago, rarely tell the whole story. As we stood together in the cold December air, I realized something important. I wasn't the only father quietly evaluating the man my daughter was about to marry. His own father had been watching him too. And judging by the sadness in his eyes, the real test of character was only beginning. When we stepped back into the house, the warmth from the fireplace washed over us, but it did nothing to ease the tension hanging in the room. Conversation stopped the moment everyone saw us. Emily looked up from the couch, her eyes moving back and forth between me and Ethan's father, trying to read our expressions. Ethan forced a smile. Everything okay? His father nodded once. Just getting some fresh air. No one seemed convinced. The white envelope still sat on the coffee table exactly where I'd left it. Waiting. Almost daring someone to pick it up again. I walked over, took my seat, and reached for it. I finished reading it, I said calmly. Ethan leaned forward immediately. So. I rested the folder on my lap. From a legal standpoint, it's professionally prepared. A smile spread across Ethan's face. I told you. The attorney who drafted it clearly knew what he was doing. He did. Every clause had been carefully written. Every asset documented. Every possible future dispute anticipated. As contracts go. It was excellent. But something still bothered me. I looked up. May I ask a question? Of course, Ethan replied confidently. If Emily signs this agreement tomorrow? I paused. What exactly will she be protecting? He blinked. My family's assets. I understand. My business. I understand. My investment accounts. I understand. My retirement savings. I understand. He looked confused. Then what's the issue? The issue isn't what you're protecting. I gently tapped one page inside the agreement. It's what you're assuming. The room became quiet again. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? I turned the document toward him and pointed to a section near the bottom. Your attorney estimated Emily's financial position. He glanced down. So? It says she enters this marriage with minimal assets. He shrugged. That's basically true. Emily looked between us. Dad. I smiled gently at her. Sweetheart, have you ever asked me about my finances? She hesitated. No. Have I ever shown you my investment statements? No. My retirement income? She slowly shook her head. No. My estate plans? Never. I nodded. And do you know why? She looked almost embarrassed. I never thought it was any of my business. Exactly. I smiled warmly. And I loved you for that. Across the room, Ethan crossed his arms. I'm still not sure what this has to do with the agreement. It has everything to do with it. His mother spoke carefully. We're only trying to avoid misunderstandings. I believe you. Then why object? I smiled. I'm not objecting. Everyone looked puzzled. I'm objecting to assumptions. The room fell silent once more. Slowly, I reached into the inside pocket of my old brown coat. Not for a wallet. Not for a checkbook. Instead, I removed a worn leather document holder that had traveled with me for years. The edges were softened from age. Margaret had insisted I keep important papers together in case of emergencies. It had become a habit. I laid it gently beside the envelope. Emily tilted her head. I've never seen that before. You've never needed to. I opened it carefully. The first item I removed was a simple blue identification card. Nothing flashy. No gold trim. No dramatic presentation. Just an old military retirement ID. I slid it across the coffee table. Ethan reached for it first. At first, his expression didn't change. Then, his eyes stopped moving. He looked down again. Read it a second time. Then a third. Color slowly drained from his face. His lips parted slightly. Finally, barely above a whisper, he spoke one word. General. No one answered. His mother reached for the card. What is it? She adjusted her glasses. The moment she read the line beneath my photograph, she froze. Oh. Emily leaned closer. Her eyes widened. Then wider still. She stared at me as if she'd never seen me before. Dad. Her voice cracked. You were. I nodded gently. A 4-star general. She covered her mouth with both hands. Tears instantly filled her eyes. No. She shook her head in disbelief. I had no idea. I know. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled softly. You never asked. She looked completely overwhelmed. I would have wanted to know. I wanted you to know me. I said quietly. Not my rank. She stood without another word and wrapped her arms tightly around me. I can't believe this. I hugged her back. It's still me, sweetheart. Across the room, Ethan hadn't moved. He was still staring at the identification card. Almost as though he expected the words to change if he looked long enough. Finally he looked at me. Why? His voice sounded strangely small now. Why would you hide something like that? I smiled. Why would I advertise it? He opened his mouth. Then closed it again. There wasn't an answer. For the first time since I'd met him, his confidence had completely disappeared. And somehow, I had a feeling this revelation wasn't going to be the biggest surprise of the evening. Ethan's mother finally found her voice. So, you've been receiving a military pension all these years? Yes. She looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. I had no idea. I never expected you to. Then Ethan spoke again. How much? His question came out almost automatically, as though his mind couldn't move past the numbers. Before I could answer, his father quietly stepped in. It doesn't matter. I appreciated the attempt. Normally, I would have agreed. But tonight wasn't normal. Tonight was about replacing assumptions with truth. I looked at Ethan calmly. A little over $28,000 a month. Silence. Absolute silence. The only sound in the room was the fire crackling behind him. Emily blinked several times. You mean? Just my military pension. She slowly sat back down. Oh my goodness. Ethan's mother lowered her eyes. His father remained completely still. Ethan looked like the floor had disappeared beneath him. For months, maybe years, he had quietly pitied me. Now the entire picture he'd built inside his head had collapsed in less than 30 seconds. But I wasn't finished. I reached back into the leather folder. There are a few more things you should probably see. I removed several neatly organized documents. Not complete financial records. Just summaries. Enough to explain what needed explaining. Emily accepted them first. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the first page. She read silently for several seconds. Then suddenly looked up. Dad. I nodded. The house. She looked back down. You transferred it into my name. 3 years ago. Her mouth slowly fell open. You never told me. You didn't need to know then. She turned another page. Her breathing caught. The lake cabin. Also yours. She looked at me as though she couldn't believe what she was reading. You gave me all of this. I wanted everything settled long before I was gone. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks now. Another page. Investment accounts. Another. Long-term trusts. Another. Education funds. She covered her mouth. Dad. I smiled gently. If you and Ethan ever have children. My voice softened. Their college education has already been taken care of. Emily couldn't hold back anymore. She began crying openly. Not because of the money. Because she'd just realized something much bigger. Every year she'd worried about my future. I'd quietly been protecting hers. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. I've had years to prepare. She wiped her eyes. You planned all of this by yourself? No. I smiled toward the old family photograph sitting on the bookshelf. Your mother helped me plan every bit of it. For a moment. It felt like Margaret was sitting there beside us. Still protecting Emily. Still guiding our family. Even after all these years. Across the room, Ethan remained completely speechless. His breathing had slowed. His eyes moved back and forth between the documents, my military ID, and the old brown coat hanging near the front door. Nothing made sense anymore. Finally he managed to speak. His voice cracked. I don't understand. What don't you understand? You? He shook his head. You could have lived anywhere. I could have. You could have driven anything. I could have. You could have worn. He glanced toward my coat. Anything. I could have. But? He stared directly into my eyes. Why didn't you? I smiled. Because none of those things ever made me happy. The room remained perfectly still. My wife and I spent years building financial security. I folded my hands together. But somewhere along the way, I smiled at the memory. We discovered something. Everyone listened. The happiest years of our marriage happened long before we had very much. No one interrupted. We laughed just as hard in our little first house as we ever did after promotions, investments, and bigger paychecks. I looked toward Emily. Money made life easier. Then toward Ethan. It never made life more meaningful. His eyes slowly lowered. I've spent years believing success looked expensive. It often does. I nodded. But character rarely advertises itself. Nobody spoke. I continued quietly. That old truck outside still gets me where I need to go. A few faint smiles appeared. This old coat still keeps me warm. Emily laughed softly through her tears. My watch still tells time. I looked at the worn military field watch Margaret had given me decades earlier. And every scratch on it reminds me of someone I still love. The room grew emotional again. Then I picked up the prenuptial agreement. Holding it beside the trust documents, I looked directly at Ethan. I never intended for anyone to know any of this. He swallowed hard. But once assumptions about my daughter were written onto legal paper, I gently placed the trust summaries beside the agreement. I believed everyone deserved to see the complete picture. No one argued. No one could. For the first time that evening, the truth sat in the center of the room. Not just about money. About people. I glanced toward Ethan's father. He gave me a small, respectful nod. It wasn't approval because I'd revealed my financial situation. It was something deeper. He was relieved. Relieved that the evening had finally become honest. Meanwhile, Ethan remained seated with his head lowered, staring at the coffee table. The confidence he'd carried all day had vanished. His expensive watch no longer seemed important. His business success no longer filled the room. For the first time since I'd met him, he wasn't thinking about wealth. He was thinking about who he'd become. And as I watched him struggle with that realization, I couldn't help believing the hardest part of Christmas was only just beginning. No one said a word. The crackling fireplace once again became the loudest sound in the room. The football game continued playing on the television, but nobody was watching anymore. Half-empty coffee cups sat untouched on the table. Christmas cookies remained on their plates, forgotten. Every person in that room was staring at the same thing. Not my military ID. Not the trust documents. Me. Ethan slowly lowered himself onto the edge of the couch as though his legs had suddenly become too weak to hold him. Only minutes earlier, he'd carried himself with absolute confidence. Now, he looked like a man questioning everything he believed about people. Finally, he took a slow, shaky breath. "I owe you an apology." His voice was barely louder than a whisper. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied him. During 38 years in the army, I'd learned that the first apology isn't always the honest one. Sometimes it's simply a response to embarrassment. Real regret takes longer. It forces a person to confront themselves before they confront anyone else. I wanted to know which kind this would be. "What are you apologizing for?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "I?" His eyes drifted toward my old brown coat hanging by the front door. "I judged you." I remained silent. "I looked at your truck." He swallowed hard. "Your house." His voice cracked. "The way you dressed." He shook his head slowly. "I assumed if someone looked poor." He couldn't finish the sentence. So I finished it for him. "Then they probably were." His eyes closed. "Yes." There was no anger in my voice. Only truth. He nodded without looking up. I believed appearances told me everything I needed to know. Another long silence filled the room. Then Emily spoke. Softly. "I tried to tell you." Ethan looked toward her. "I know." "No." She gently shook her head. "You heard me." A tear slipped down her cheek. "But you didn't listen." He looked away. She continued. "I kept telling you that my dad has never cared about expensive things." "I know." "You thought he lacked ambition." He buried his face in his hands. "I know." "You thought he needed saving." "I know." Each answer became quieter than the one before it. Until finally, he stopped speaking altogether. Across the room, Ethan's mother slowly stood. She walked over until she was standing directly in front of me. "Richard?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I owe you an apology too." "You don't owe me anything." "I do." She looked genuinely ashamed. "I kept asking questions about your retirement." I smiled gently. "You thought I needed help." She nodded. "I honestly believed we were being kind." "I believe you were." She looked relieved for only a second before I quietly added, "But kindness without understanding often sounds like pity." Her shoulders dropped. "I never wanted you to feel pitied." "I know." And I meant it. Unlike Ethan, she hadn't acted out of pride. She'd accepted a story she'd quietly built in her own mind. She wasn't cruel. She'd simply never questioned her assumptions. There was a difference. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan's father slowly stood. He walked toward the Christmas tree, resting one hand lightly against the back of a chair before turning toward everyone. His expression was calm. But his eyes carried years of disappointment. "I think," he said quietly, "it's time everyone understands why that agreement was written." Ethan looked up. "Dad." "No." His father gently interrupted. "You need to hear this." The room fell silent once again. I asked our attorney to prepare that prenuptial agreement. Everyone looked surprised. Even Ethan. "I know you did." His father slowly shook his head. "No." His voice remained calm. You don't. He looked directly at his son. I didn't prepare it because I believed Emily wanted our money. Confusion spread across Ethan's face. Then why? His father sighed. Because I wanted to find out whether my son had started believing money was the only thing worth protecting. No one moved. No one breathed. I've watched you change over the last 3 years. His words weren't angry. They were heartbreaking. You stopped visiting your grandmother after she moved into assisted living. Ethan lowered his eyes. You complained about your cousin's wedding because it wasn't held at an expensive country club. Silence. You laughed at your college roommate for driving an old pickup. Another silence. And tonight? His father looked toward my old brown coat hanging beside the front door. You introduced a good man as though he needed someone to rescue him. Ethan's shoulders slumped. I didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant. His father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You've become so impressed with success. He paused. That you've forgotten how to recognize dignity. Those words settled over the room like fresh snow. Heavy. Quiet. Impossible to ignore. Emily reached over and took my hand. I noticed it too. Ethan looked at her in disbelief. You never said anything. She stared directly into his eyes. I did. He frowned. When? The waitress. His expression changed. The waitress who accidentally spilled water. He remembered. You apologized to me because dinner took longer. She shook her head. You never apologized to her. His eyes slowly closed. And when Dad's truck broke down. She continued softly. You offered to buy him another. I wanted to help. You wanted to choose one you wouldn't be embarrassed to park beside. No one defended him. Because no one could. For nearly a full minute. The room remained completely silent. Then Ethan stood. Without saying a word, he walked across the living room toward the front door. Everyone watched. He carefully lifted my old brown coat from the coat rack. This time, he didn't look at it with quiet judgment. He held it with both hands. Almost reverently. He slowly walked back toward me. His eyes glistened with tears. I'm ashamed. His voice broke. I looked at this coat. He ran his fingers gently across the worn sleeve Margaret had repaired years ago. And I thought it told me who you were. A bitter smile crossed his face. It never occurred to me. He looked directly into my eyes. That maybe it was telling me who I was. The room became absolutely still. Even the fire seemed quieter. Behind me, I heard Ethan's father slowly exhale. I've been waiting years to hear you say that. Ethan stepped closer and carefully handed me the coat. I'm sorry. He hesitated. Richard. I accepted the coat and smiled faintly. Try again. He looked confused. What? You've been calling me Richard for almost 3 years. He stared at me for several seconds. Then his voice softened. I'm sorry. A tear rolled down his cheek. Dad. Emily immediately broke into tears again. Not tears of heartbreak. Tears of relief. The kind that come after holding your breath for far too long. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. This hug felt different from every handshake we'd ever shared. It wasn't polite. It wasn't formal. It wasn't about military rank. Or money. Or pride. For the very first time. It felt like family. The room stayed quiet long after Ethan called me Dad. No one seemed eager to break the silence. Sometimes the most important conversations don't happen through words. They happen through the weight of everything left unsaid. The fire crackled softly, filling the spaces where pride had once spoken. Christmas music drifted through the house again, but somehow it sounded different now. Warmer. More honest. I slipped my old brown coat back over my arm instead of hanging it up. It wasn't just a coat anymore. It had become a reminder. A reminder that people rarely see the whole story. Ethan slowly sat back down, wiping the last traces of tears from his face. I've spent years chasing the wrong things, he admitted quietly. No one interrupted him. I thought success meant making more money than everyone around me. He looked at his expensive watch before slowly removing it from his wrist. I judged people by what they drove, where they lived, what they wore. His voice cracked. And somehow, he looked directly at me. I convinced myself that made me successful. I smiled gently. It made you wealthy. He nodded. But not successful. There's a difference. He leaned forward. I understand that now. I wasn't interested in making him feel guilty. Life had already started doing that. Real growth doesn't happen because someone humiliates you. It happens because truth finally becomes louder than your pride. Emily reached over and intertwined her fingers with Ethan's. She smiled through tears. I've been waiting for this version of you. He looked at her. I didn't realize there was another version. There always was. She squeezed his hand. You just buried him under ambition. The room fell silent again. Then Ethan's father walked toward the Christmas tree and carefully picked up the walnut keepsake box I'd made. He read the carved words one more time. Family isn't built by money. It's built by showing up. He closed the lid carefully. You know, he said thoughtfully. I've built businesses for 40 years. He smiled softly. But tonight, he looked around the room. This little wooden box taught me more than every board meeting I've ever attended. Everyone laughed quietly. Not because it was funny. Because it was true. Ethan looked toward me. I don't deserve Emily. I shook my head. Nobody deserves another person. He looked confused. We earn trust. I paused. And then we spend the rest of our lives protecting it. He nodded slowly. I've got a lot of work to do. You do. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. You shouldn't. He smiled faintly. But I hope someday. He glanced toward Emily. I'll become the man she believed I already was. Emily leaned against his shoulder. I think today was your first step. A comfortable silence settled over the room. For the first time all evening. Nobody cared who earned the most money. Nobody cared whose investment portfolio was larger. Nobody cared what kind of vehicle sat in the driveway. Those things suddenly seemed incredibly small. Ethan's mother quietly walked into the kitchen before returning with a fresh pot of coffee. This one's on me, she laughed. I think we could all use another cup. The simple comment broke the tension completely. Everyone smiled. Coffee was poured. Pie was served again. The football game was forgotten. Instead, stories began filling the room. Real stories. Ethan's father talked about the tiny apartment where he and his wife had lived after getting married. His mother laughed while describing how they used folding lawn chairs because they couldn't afford furniture. Emily shared embarrassing childhood memories. Even I found myself telling stories from my early days as a young lieutenant. Not the medals. Not the promotions. The mistakes. The lessons. The friendships. The people. Because those were the memories that mattered. Hours passed before anyone noticed. Outside, fresh snow had begun falling. The neighborhood looked peaceful beneath the glowing Christmas lights. Eventually it was time to leave. Everyone gathered near the front door. This time, Ethan reached for my coat before I could. He carefully held it open. May I? I smiled. I'd be honored. He helped me slip it on. His eyes paused on the patched sleeve. This used to embarrass me. He ran his hand gently across the worn fabric. Now. He smiled. I hope I become the kind of man worthy of wearing a coat like this someday. I laughed. I sincerely hope you never need one this old. Everyone laughed with me. Before I walked outside, Ethan stopped me. Dad. Yes? Can I ask you one last question? Of course. If you had told everyone who you really were the moment you walked into this house. He hesitated. None of tonight would have happened. You're right. So why didn't you? I looked out at the snow falling beneath the streetlights. Then back at him. Because respect that's given to a title isn't really given to the person. He listened carefully. A uniform can earn a salute. I paused. A bank account can impress strangers. Another pause. But neither one tells people how to treat someone who appears to have nothing. The room became perfectly still. I wanted to know whether I'd be welcomed. I smiled gently. Before anyone knew what I'd accomplished. He lowered his head. I failed. No. He looked up. You learned. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. I'll remember that. I hope you do. Emily hugged me tightly. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. As I walked toward my old pickup, I noticed Ethan standing on the front porch watching me. Not looking at the truck. Looking at me. That simple difference told me more than any apology ever could. The wedding took place 5 months later. Not in a luxury ballroom. Not at an exclusive country club. Emily chose the small white church her mother had always loved. Fresh flowers lined the aisle. Neighbors sat beside business executives. Veterans sat beside young professionals. Nobody asked who had more money. Nobody cared. When Emily walked down the aisle, she carried a small white rose tucked into her bouquet. Margaret's favorite flower. I knew exactly why. Halfway through the ceremony, I looked toward Ethan. He wasn't watching the guests. He wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't thinking about appearances. His eyes never left my daughter. For the first time, I saw the man she'd fallen in love with years earlier. The reception was simple. There were no extravagant displays. Just laughter. Music. Children running across the dance floor. Families sharing stories. As the evening came to an end, Ethan walked over carrying a small wrapped package. I made something. He looked almost nervous. You inspired me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple wooden picture frame. It wasn't perfect. One corner sat slightly uneven. The finish wasn't as smooth as mine. But that wasn't what mattered. Inside the frame was a photograph from Christmas. The moment he'd handed me my old coat. Across the bottom, burned carefully into the wood, were 8 simple words. Character is revealed when no one is watching. I looked up. He smiled. I finally understand. I stood and embraced him. No. I said quietly. You've finally begun. Because character isn't built in one conversation. It isn't created by one apology. It's built every ordinary day afterward. When nobody is keeping score. Years have passed since that unforgettable Christmas. The old pickup still sits in my garage. The brown coat still hangs beside the front door. The military watch still has its scratches. And every Tuesday morning, I still drink coffee at the same little diner. The waitress knows my order before I sit down. Sometimes Ethan joins me. Not because he has to. Because he wants to. He no longer talks about expensive watches or luxury cars. Instead, we talk about Emily. About family. About the veterans we volunteer with. About life. Sometimes he'll look across the table and smile. You know. He'll say, "That Christmas saved me." I always shake my head. No. It revealed you. Because that's what life does. It doesn't create character. It uncovers it. Money comes and goes. Titles are eventually handed to someone else. Homes are sold. Cars wear out. Even medals gather dust. But kindness? Humility? Integrity? Those become the inheritance people carry long after everything else is gone. So if this story reminded you of someone in your own life, don't wait for another Christmas to tell them how much they matter. Pride builds walls one brick at a time. Love tears them down one conversation at a time. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Royal Rich Chronicles, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember this. The richest people in the world aren't always the ones with the biggest bank accounts, they're the ones whose character is worth more than anything money could ever buy.